All right, we are moving into our section on redemption. And so you're going to be on page 53. Obviously, in the beginning of the Bible, we talk about creation. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And so, God makes everything and he makes everything good. That's going to be key to reading the Bible as a story. Everything is good. And if you read that, we notice it's repeated. Everything was good. Everything was good. Everything was good. Everything was good. And then we notice a break in the pattern. All of a sudden, something is not good. And the thing that's not good in the first two chapters of the Bible is that man should be alone. We know from our own just human nature, we're not made to be alone. This is why, solitary confinement is so difficult for us. It's why people just inherently get lonely. It's why people live longer with a pet or friends in their life. We're not made to be alone. So what we're getting pretty quickly is this picture of how we're built. We're built for relationship. This is backed up as well in the creation account by the fact that we're made in God's image. By being made in God's image, this means a couple things. One is that we reflect his nature, and the other is that we serve his purpose. And so both of these ideas are kind of built in. This would have made a lot more sense in the time that it was written to ancient readers who had more of a concept of this. They would talk about the son of a king, for instance, being the image of that king, his image bearer. Really what this idea is, again, is we are made like the nature of God. Doesn't mean we're God, doesn't mean we're exactly like God, but we share a lot of God's ways. We are, higher than animals. We have will, we have emotion, we have personhood. We have thinking and reason and wisdom and all of these things. And so we are made in God's image, not completely unlike his nature. The second thing is that we serve his purpose. He gives us purpose. And so also being made in his image, if we're to get theological, which I guess we are, the Trinity has a relationship. The Father has a relationship with the Son, who has a relationship with the Spirit, who has a relationship with the Father, and around we go. And so God himself has a relationship with himself. God has a relationship with God. God glorifies God. And so being made in God's image, we are made to be in relationship with God and to glorify God. We serve his purpose. So God creates the first man and woman. And what's actually important here is that they don't really have... We say Adam's name is Adam. Adam also kind of means man, but Eve is a name, and Eve does not get her name at this point. She's just called the woman. So this is one of those things, again, where as you read the story, just see what's there and see what's the name of our class? Unfolding Gospel. See what unfolds. See what comes. Her name is not Eve right up front. She doesn't have a name. So God creates things. Everything is good. We understand that people are meant to be made in relationship with God. And God gives the man and woman their first command, or sometimes I call it their first purpose statement. And that is going to be absolutely crucial to the Bible story. And that is, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it. Be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it. And so the first man and woman, why are they to be fruitful and multiply? Well, this is God's purpose for humankind. Okay, remember in the last video we talked about representation. The part represents the whole, and what goes for the part goes for the whole. That's going to be crucial here in this story. Also, what we have largely in the first 3 chapters of Genesis is like this tiny version of what's to come. Okay, if you're into English and you were the weird person like me who preferred to write an essay instead of, I don't know, whatever else you do in school, then you'll track with this. If not, I don't know, check your email for a second. I know you're already doing that anyway. So in English, we often write a thesis statement. In that thesis statement, the thesis statement really, they say, okay, say what you're going to say in this essay. The reality is the thesis statement is what you would say if okay, give me your entire essay in one second while you run out of a burning building. That's your thesis statement. It's how would you say this in one sentence? The thesis statement then is just going to get fleshed out and detailed out in a larger version in the rest of your paper. That's really what a thesis is. It's your real point, your true point, your main point. But now I'm gonna unfold that point for you through the rest of the paper. The Bible largely does that. I'm not saying don't take the analogy too far. I'm not saying that the first 3 chapters of Genesis are, the only thing you need to read, nor are they everything in the Bible, nor do don't, obviously not. But in a sense, you have the Bible's message encapsulated in these first 3 chapters. Why? You have God created everything good. Through man's sin, we corrupted all the purpose for which God had made things. God then provided for us a way to be restored back to relationship with him. And that, all right there, that's all built into Genesis 1 through 3. So everything's good except what? Now we know man needs relationship. He has a perfect relationship with God and with one another. The man and the woman, they knew, they didn't know they were naked. Why? Because they had never experienced shame. So what we have here is this picture of kind of morally perfect or neutral. People debate whether or not they would have or could have sinned, or could have not sinned, rather. That's not a debate for this class. That's not what's important here. What's important here is you have people who clearly can choose to go against what God had for them, go against his purpose, but have this flawless relationship with him until then. So Adam and Eve give into, I shouldn't say Adam and Eve, Adam and the woman. It's going to be important in a second. Adam and the woman, we'll move on to the fall here. Adam and the woman give into, and I'm not going over, by the way, let me pause for a second. I'm not going over all that's written in your book because for the umpteenth time, you need to read it. I won't know if you don't read it, but you'll know, and you're not going to get as much out of the class. So I'm giving you kind of, again, interpretive highlights on top of the book, which is a synopsis of the actual Bible. And so if this is just kind of a brief overview synopsis, that's the best we can do in a class like this, and you don't read or watch the videos, at least do both, then you're getting like the brief synopsis of the real thing. So you're not getting as much as you need to. All that to say, as I go through this, yes, read. B, the events section is really chronological, really strictly chronological. This is not. So you'll see it bounce around a little bit, like on the bottom of 53 there. It talks all of a sudden about Christ being a second Adam. We're going to talk more about that when we get to Jesus. So for the sake of me not rambling, I'm going to tell you verbally things in a linear fashion. Your book's gonna make connections as it goes. It's kind of 2 different approaches, but I can't do that in my brain. I can do it on paper. So I'm gonna speak to you in a linear way of what's going on here. So the fall comes. There's an attempt, obviously, by Adam and his wife to be like God. This is what they want. The serpent has told them, God lied to you, right? He knows that you will not surely die if you eat of the fruit he told you not to eat of. So what's the first thing God told them? Be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, and subdue it. Second thing he told them, eat of any fruit in the garden except the fruit of the knowledge of the tree, the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Eve goes, wow, yeah, so I can be like God. We can be like God. So she makes this act of rebellion in order to be like God. In doing so, and she gives to Adam, and he follows suit. In doing so, they become separated from God like never before. Suddenly, shame, guilt, and fear enter into their souls. We'll talk about this a little more when we get to the Jesus section. How are they ashamed? They know they're naked. How do they know they're naked? They don't know what clothes are. They feel and experience nakedness. They feel and experience guilt, legal guilt, knowing that they're wrong, and it comes out. They start blame shifting. No, it was the woman. No, it was the serpent. They experience fear because they're hiding from God, and they stitch together fig leaves to hide from God. And so their relationship that they had with God now is no longer flawless. It's broken. Their relationship with one another is never again to be flawless. It's now going to be broken. And God had told them, in the day that you eat of this, you will surely die. Okay, then the evening comes, and God is walking in the garden in the cool of the evening. What, as we read this, the Bible tells the most amazing story. We go, oh my gosh, evening, night is coming. He said, in the day that you eat it, you will surely die. The day is drawing close. He's coming to kill us, right? It's not said in there. It's not written in there. I know I told you. Only read what's there. But when we read a story and we pick up just the facts that are there, we put it together in a way that we understand. They think they're going to be killed, is my interpretation of that. The day's drawing closed. They think this is it for them. God comes and he says, where are you? Where were you? And they, well, we were afraid of you, and so we hid ourselves from you because we were naked. How'd you know you were naked? Good question, And so what's interesting here, and I want you to see this and understand this, this is super crucial. God told them, in the day they eat of the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil, they will die. Here's the day. They're not dying. God shows up and he doesn't zap them. He doesn't squish them. He doesn't kill them. This is one of those times in the Bible. There's a few where you go, whoa, God seems to be almost like changing his mind. Like he actually said he was going to do something and then he didn't. Those times in the Bible, by the way, are always times of God relenting from judgment. Never God being like, I'm going to be kind. No, never mind. I'm going to be not kind. That's not it. But here God almost seems to be changing his mind. And so what's so fascinating about this is God pronounces this curse on Adam, on Eve, and on the serpent. Okay. 3 curses to them. So to Adam, what does he tell him? You will what? You will now, by the sweat of your brow and the toil of your hands, now you will get the earth to yield food for you. You'll be fighting against thistles, weeds, thorns. Do you know, horticulturally, there's really no definition of a weed. A weed is just an opportune plant. There's really nothing, scientifically different about a weed from other plants. And so why do some of these plants act this way? The Bible would say it's part of the curse on the earth. There is no scientific explanation for the difference there, simply because this is part of God's curse. And so, Adam's going to toil and have fruitlessness and have difficulty feeding them from the earth because of all of these things. Okay. Eve. Well, again, her name's not Eve at this point. To the woman, he says, you will have pain in, the Hebrew word can either be translated childbearing or conception. So if we can translate it either way, the common denominator we should say is Eve, the woman, and all women will through difficulty bear children. Then he says, this is also translated sometimes a little bit differently, that her desire will be for her husband, or some translations are against her husband, and he shall rule over you. Okay, so that seems weird. Let's put that on your brain shelf. Then to the serpent, God says, you shall crawl on your belly all your days. And he says that a seed of the woman shall come who will crush the head of the serpent, and the serpent shall bruise his heel. What is going on? This is super weird. This is also super crucial. This is actually called a proto-evangelion, which is a Greek term for the first instance of the good news, the first instance of the gospel, but it's very veiled in mysterious language and symbolism. And so here's what's cool. This all sounds kind of weird and arbitrary if you don't pay attention to the story. You ever watch a parent, or you are a parent, and they just like start making up punishments for their kids because it's like, I don't know what to do. You can't, honey, what do we make up this time? Like you've just run out of stuff. That's what it kind of sounds like God is saying. He's just making up stuff. Weeds, painful childbirth. And, Adam's like, man, mine's not so bad. Serpent, I think we're going to crush your head. That's not what's happening at all. That's not what's happening at all. Here's what's happening. What was God's purpose statement to them? What was his original command to them? Be fruitful and multiply. Be fruitful and multiply. What does he want? He wants a world full of people who have a perfect relationship with him and glorify him and live in perfect relationship with him. That's his original purpose. A multitude of people. Write this down in your brain. God's original purpose was for mankind was a multitude of people who would have perfect relationship with him and glorify and enjoy him, right? Because if Adam and Eve had been fruitful and multiplied in that perfect state, that's what would have happened. Then God said, you're going to die in the day that you eat of the fruit. Now he's saying you will have difficulty to have many children. And you will have a marred relationship with you and your husband. You will always seek to be, you will seek either his place, or you will, you will desire him and he won't satisfy you, something like that. Typically translated as you will want his place, but he will rule over you. Damaged relationship between the two. What was the second part of the command, or the original purpose statement? Fill the earth and subdue it. Fill the earth, subdue it, subdue the earth. Have dominion, he says, over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air, and all the animals, right? He brought the animals to Adam to name the animals. Now what's he telling Adam? Now in that dominion, you will have great difficulty. You'll have a hard time getting the earth to bear fruit for you. You'll have a hard time subduing the earth. What is the implication? The implication is, oh my goodness, he still is going to have me carry out my purpose. He still has a purpose for mankind, but now it's going to be accomplished through pain and suffering. What is the other implication? We're not dying today. Actually, we're going to live for a while. Yeah, we're under a curse, but that curse is even laced with blessing and grace. Why? Because God is saying, I'm not going to have you die today. Now, theologians will say, and I would agree, and this is a fine interpretation, that they died spiritually that day. I don't have a problem with that. But what I'm saying is I think we miss in the telling of the story the mercy and grace God is putting into what we see as only a curse. It's saying, again, let me reiterate, your purpose is the same, but now it comes through pain and suffering. That's going to be important for the rest of the story of the Bible. For the rest of the story of the Bible, that theme of pain and suffering accomplishing God's purpose is going to be crucial for the rest of the text. To the serpent, that a seed of the woman is coming who will crush the serpent's head, or he will crush your seed. He will crush, the idea would be that somebody's going to come and going to defeat those who are the descendants of this serpent satanic being, or the devil. Does the serpent or the devil have actual children? No. Later, Jesus is going to say that those who are self-righteous and who are against him are sons of their father, the devil, that the Pharisees are sons of their father, the devil. Cain will be called, later in the Bible, Cain will be referred to as a son of the evil one. And so really what this is one of Eve's descendants will crush not just bad people, but evil itself that underlies and gave birth to the badness in those people is kind of the literary idea, I believe. But you shall bruise his heel. In doing so, he will be wounded. The idea is that somebody's going to come, and if you were to, which creeps me out, step on a snake, which is like my worst nightmare. I hate snakes. I have a biblical reason for hating snakes, apparently. Step on a snake. In stepping and crushing on that snake, he gets one bite in, and so the crusher is wounded in the process of crushing evil, crushing the snake. What's the implication of that? Adam and the woman are going to have generations of descendants. God's not going to kill them today. God still has purpose for them. God is allowing them to move forward with that purpose. God is a God of grace. What else is laced with grace that looks like punishment to us is that he kicks them out of the garden. We often go, he kicked them out of the garden so that they couldn't enjoy it anymore. Not really. Not really, because if you read the story, God tells them to subdue what? The garden? No, subdue the earth. So I think the idea is that God is giving them an extension of his purpose on earth, which is to bring order and beauty to it and bring it under submission and bring it to fruitfulness and expand this garden out through creation. I don't know what the rest of the world looked like at the time. I wasn't there. But we're only told about this garden in one location. We're not told about what the rest of the world was like. We know in the early part of Genesis that God, it says, the Spirit of the Lord hovered above the waters, and then he separated the waters from the land. So he begins to form the world from chaos into order. And so I think God is telling Adam and Eve to do the same, bring the order and beauty of the Garden of Eden that he gave them and expand it out. So they were never meant to stay there forever anyway. But he sends them out, if we read the story, why? So that they wouldn't eat of the fruit of the tree of life and live forever. I believe this is also a judgment laced with mercy, because God did not want them to live forever in this broken, fallen state, in a marred relationship with God and with each other. So what he's doing is he's now allowing death to come in. He's allowing death to come into their experience. Not now. He's going to delay it for actually super long time. Death's going to come in to be part of everybody's experience, but now it is an opportunity to be released from this broken, fallen state and these decaying mortal bodies, and to be with him. To be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord, the New Testament tells us. So even this is a judgment, but it's really a mercy. It's really a mercy. And so we have to understand what's going on there. If you don't understand Genesis 3, the rest of the Bible doesn't make a ton of sense, because as I said before to us in class and on a previous video, Genesis 3 is like the part in the movie where things, that 10-minute mark where everything changes, and the rest of the movie is going to be a response to that. The rest of the Bible is really a response to Genesis 3, and there's so much here in Genesis 3. Likewise, where is it on your page? Likewise, God clothes them in animal skin. This again is judgment, but it's really a mercy. It's really a mercy clothed in judgment, not to draw a pun on this one. But God gives them animal skins. I don't think he generated animal skins out of nowhere. I think he killed an animal to further cover their shame. But it doesn't take away their shame. It just covers it. So it deals with it on a temporary and external basis. Well, God is going to later inaugurate an institution of sacrifice where a lot of animals are going to be killed to cover over sin on a temporary and external basis, but not really take away sin. Well, somebody's going to come, and in John 1, John the Baptist is going to say, "Behold the Lamb of God who" what? Not makes us feel better about our sin, not gives us a kiss on our cheek, not tells us our sin is okay, not covers our sin on a temporary, symbolic, or external basis. Here comes the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world. We are set up in the Bible for what Jesus is going to come and do, but we have to know the story of the Bible to understand what he comes and does, okay? We have to know that. We have to have, as I said in your introduction video, we have to have a whole understanding of the Bible. We have to understand the Bible as a whole in order to have a whole understanding of the Bible. All right. At that point, Adam names his wife. Beautiful moment. Names his wife Eve, the mother of all living, the mother of many, something like that. What's the point here? Adam goes, okay, I will survive, right? And he gives his wife a name, and that name is so important. Names are important in the Bible. Because that name is saying, God has mercy. God will accomplish so much. My wife she will have this purpose. She will receive mercy. We will receive mercy. Someone's coming. And I think maybe this is a little bit of Andrew interpretation, but built into that, naming her the mother of all living, is that knowledge that, wow, one of our children is going to fix this. One of our children is going to fix this. What an amazing thing. Also in the fall, the earth becomes cursed. It no longer functions the way it should. We first see that with weeds and thistles and thorns and all of this. But we also, believe that at that point, violence comes into play. What that all looks like, we're not always sure, but that's how we interpret that. You have a thing on 55 there about something that we miss sometimes because it's really, kind of mentioned in the New Testament and not the Old, but that all of this was being watched and observed and has been watched and observed as well by angels. And so angels have looked at and seen God through the lens of what he's done with us throughout human history. And so you can read that there from Jeff Jackson, somebody I really admire and respect. Okay. We move forward in the story, as you know, and as people multiply, sin multiplies. And as sin multiplies, God needs to do something about it. And so God brings a flood. And I'm going to talk about the flood only really briefly. When God brings a flood, when we read the Bible as a story and we see this flood, we kind of get this little thing in our brain that goes, oh, this sounds familiar. Now, in the first reading or second reading or third reading, it may not sound familiar, but maybe on the fourth reading, it gets you click in and you go, where have I seen this before? Which is a great question to ask when you're trying to read the Bible as a story. Where have I seen this before? So let me quiz you. I don't know if you'll get the right or wrong answer, and you can't talk to the video. I guess you could. I often talk to videos and podcasts and TV. It drives my wife crazy. But I can't hear you, so say whatever you want. Let me ask you this. In the flood, the whole world is covered in water. You have Noah and his family bobbing above the waters. When they're done, a dove is going to come to the ark to let them know that the flood is over. Okay, good Calvary Chapel people. What is the dove a symbol of? That's right. I'm sure you're talking to your screen right now. The Holy Spirit. Very good. The dove is a symbol of the Holy Spirit. We see the dove come over the waters. We should think Holy Spirit coming over the waters. Where in the past in this have we seen the Holy Spirit over the waters? Creation. The Spirit of the Lord was hovering above the waters, right? Why do I say that? God is recreating. He's not really recreating. I say resetting. He's resetting creation as far back as he can without going completely back to zero. He's going really far back. He's going to go down to 8 people, right? Adam's sons, his 3 sons, and their wives, and the animals on the ark. He's gonna restart from that sort of seed, if you will. Very, very common picture in the Bible. Little piece, little part, not only we've said now representing the whole, but also growing into the whole. That's going to be a common image you get in the Bible. By the way, when I say image, and I talk about the image of a dove and the symbol of a dove, do not for a moment think that I am saying that this is just symbolic or just mythological. I'm not saying that at all. I'm going to argue in this class really strongly later on that it matters super duper duper much, which is my theological term, super duper duper much, that these things actually historically took place, but that they also have a symbolic value as well. Okay, so they are both literal and symbolic. And most cultures, most religions have no place for something like that. Something is either symbolic or literally historically true, not both. And the Bible, I argue, or will argue with you, I guess not with you, at you, to you, I will argue to you. You can argue with me if you want, people have. I will argue that the Bible is full of things that are both literally true and symbolically meaningful. Okay, so the flood. we go back almost to creation. God starts again with this family. What you should also see in the flood is, or let me tell it to you this way, and this might give you a little hint of some of the ways we're going in this class. If I told it to you this way and I said, in the flood, God saves the one righteous man and the family who allied themselves with him in order to judge and destroy all the wicked of the world. What's the opposite of that? Or what's a counterpoint to that? We might say, well, is there anywhere in the Bible, and yes, I'm giving you a leading question here, I understand that, but whatever, I'm not a lawyer. I'm allowed to do this. Is there anywhere in the Bible where you see a counterweight to that in the form of the one righteous man actually being destroyed, so that those who ally themselves with him and become his family are saved, so that all the wicked could be saved as well, right? Let me say it again this way. Have you ever seen in the Bible one righteous man being destroyed so that the wicked could be saved? Yes, Jesus, right? Hint, hint, spoiler alert. This is one of those areas where we say God is completely and totally in his right to do this in the flood, but God also has the right to be gracious. So he has the right to judge, but he also has the right to be gracious. So if in the curse of the fall, he's not killing them that day, and you're like, that doesn't seem in line with our policies, God. That doesn't seem in line with what you promised. Okay, but wouldn't you rather have him err on the side, not err like he errs, but wouldn't you rather have him be on the side of mercy? So we're set up to understand now that we have a God who is righteous and who judges and who does not overlook sin. But we're also set up in the story of the Bible to understand from the outset that we have a God who will be merciful even over being a judge, and will sort of clothe mercy in judgment so that even his judgments are acts of mercy. Whoa. As we read the Bible, we want to get to know God. What a fascinating God we're already getting to know just here in the Bible, even with the flood, which, by the way, I mean, we make this like a cutesy-wootsy children's story. It is one of the darkest, most desperate, despairing stories in the entire Bible. It's horrendous. I remember in our church, in the nursery, there used to be this cute mural of Noah's Ark. And I remember just always looking at it and being like, where's the grasping hand coming up out of the water? Like, it's a horrible, horrible thing. But again, let me reiterate one more time before we move on. God is fully within his rights to judge a wicked world. But his judgment is always the clothing wrapped around the mercy inside. Okay. God repopulates the world with Noah and his sons. As he repopulates it, he repeats to Noah, you're on 56. Sorry for moving the screen around for no reason. As he repopulates the world, he repeats what he had originally told to Adam and Eve: be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, and subdue it. So God, at the end of Genesis 8 and the beginning of Genesis 9, is going to make a covenant with Noah, make an agreement with Noah, but the covenant is really pretty one-sided. Usually in the Bible, covenants are agreements, but God makes a covenant promise, more so, to Noah to never again destroy the earth with a flood. The sign that he gives is a rainbow. He will never again do this. And he actually says, I make a covenant not only with you, but with all creatures of the earth, that I will never again destroy the earth. He says why. He tells him why. He says, because God knew that the heart of man, the Hebrew word is yetzer. This idea is frame. If you ever framed concrete, I haven't. I make analogies over stuff I've never experienced. I guess that's wrong, but I'm not a practical guy. But if you were to frame concrete, or I guess frame a picture or whatever, and you gotta frame it right, and if your frame is wrong, the whole thing's wrong. That's the word that the Hebrew Bible is using for the heart of man, that their very frame is wrong. So now they're always messed up. C.S. Lewis uses in one of his novels the word bent. They're always bent. They're always not going to serve that purpose quite right. So God says that he's making this promise to never again destroy the earth because he knows man is always going to be messed up. Wow. What's that saying? God is promising to preserve his purpose and to preserve us to experience his promise. How can this coming seed come if God is going to destroy all sin first? Well, this person, this seed of Eve, is going to come and destroy sin. So God's going to allow us to continue long enough for that to happen. Okay. As people multiply, we get to Babel. In Babel, all the people are doing what? They are saying, let's, is that an Al Green song? Let's stay together. I don't know. Let's stay together. It says that they wanted to build a tower into the heavens, make a name for themselves, lest they be scattered over the face of the earth. Well, remember, what is God's purpose statement for humankind? Be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it. Why was that originally said? We can extrapolate because he wanted an earth full of people who would know and glorify him and have good relationship with him. Now the earth is filling up again a second time after the flood with people who don't know and don't have a good relationship with him, should have, and that should have been passed on. However, now we have people who are specifically trying to, instead of glorifying and having that relationship with him, glorifying and making a name for themselves. Instead of being fruitful, multiply, and filling the earth, they're trying to stay in one place. Instead of allowing God to interact with them or come up with any of God's ways to bring heaven and earth together, rather they are trying to reach heaven. How literal is that? Are they really trying to reach up into heaven? People have different opinions on that. It doesn't really matter if they were literally trying to climb up into heaven or not. It's possible in their understanding they thought that the sky was close enough. Bible scholars and nerds go all over the place with that. Doesn't really matter. I think the point is they are doing the exact opposite of what God would have them do. So what does God do? He comes down and zaps humankind? Nope. He's not going to zap. He's going to come down and he's going to confuse their languages. So now God is going to start dealing with them differently. And I stoled, but cited my source. I borrowed this from Living Springs Press. We will have for you one day a perspectives class on missions. And I borrowed this from the material in that class. Love that class, promote that class, actually help with that class. Before Babel, God's going to reach, you can look at this chart here on 57 if you have your screen up and you're not driving. Before Babel, God is going to reach humankind sovereignly without human agents. God's just interacting with people. He's going to talk with Adam and Eve. He's going to talk with Cain. He's going to talk with Noah directly. After Babel, God is going to reach humankind through chosen human agents. He's going to send prophets. He's going to send kings. He's going to send, sometimes it's neither of those two. It could be a judge. It could be whatever. God's going to send human people to be his mediator to interact with people. I love this chart. This lines up with Jesus's strategy, his great commission that we're going to talk about in this class of go. Jesus tells them, go. Before Babel, God reaches humankind in one geographical location because that's mainly where they are. But then he's going to reach humankind in scattered geographical regions. Jesus is going to say, go into all the world, into all the world. Before Babel, God's going to reach humankind as a single cultural grouping because that's what they are. But then after Babel, he's going to reach humankind in multitudes of separate cultural groupings. And so Jesus says to make disciples of all nations. So we have all these groups, and we set the stage with all these groups now for this one person from one group named Abram. His name will later be changed to Abraham. Not unlike Eve getting a name, Abram's name means exalted father. Abraham means, father of a multitude. So Abraham is told in Genesis 12 that God is going to bless him. And by the way, and I mentioned this earlier, but I'll reiterate. Abram, we don't know who he is. He probably worshipped a moon goddess. He's from Ur of the Chaldeans. He's not. There are no such things as Hebrews or Jews or Israelite. That doesn't exist yet. He's the predecessor of all of that, but he's just a pagan dude, probably, again, worshiping a moon goddess. God somehow interrupts his life. I wish I had that story. It's one of the ones when I get to heaven, I'm going to say, tell me how God and Abraham began to interact. What the heck did that look like? Because I feel like I'm jumping in the middle of the conversation. So God tells Abraham, I'm going to bless you. I'm going to bless those who bless you and curse those who curse you. I'm going to give you a land. I'm going to give you a multitude of descendants you cannot number. And through you, all the nations, actually says all the families of the earth will be blessed. And Abraham believes God. And later in Genesis 15, God seals this with a covenant, second covenant. We had the covenant with Noah. Now we have a covenant with Abraham. God is making this covenant. Normally a covenant is agreement between two parties. But God puts Abraham to sleep, and so the idea is that God is making this promise unilaterally, one-sided, on his own. I'm telling you, I'm promising, and Abraham, you don't even have to agree. You just have to believe. You don't have to do anything. You believe. Sorry about that. Abraham moves through this promised land that he was going to receive, and he moves into Egypt because there's a famine. He comes back out of Egypt. This is going to happen a number of times in the Bible. You'll see a pattern of people going into and out of Egypt, into Egypt for protection. They have some trouble in Egypt, and they go back out of Egypt. All right. Abram has no son for quite a long time, if you know the story. So how is Abraham going to receive a multitude of descendants? How is the seed of Eve going to come if we cut off the line that's carrying this blessing? So Abram tries to have a child by his wife's handmaid, and this is not the child of promise. So in their old age, God tells Abram and his wife that they will have a child this time next year. They have Isaac. But when Isaac's, he's older, he's a young man, God tells Abraham to sacrifice Isaac on Mount Moriah. And Genesis 22 shows us Abraham going through with this process up to the point where an angel stops him and says that the Lord will provide a sacrifice, and that fact is not true. Abraham told his son the Lord would provide a sacrifice. The angel stops him and shows him that there's a ram caught in a thicket, and Abraham sacrifices that instead. So he's supposed to sacrifice the son of promise through whom blessing will come, but God stops him and provides a sacrifice of a ram. Counterpoint to that, we sacrifice rams throughout most of the Old Testament, not always rams, but lambs, sheep, throughout until God provides a sacrifice of his son instead. Amazing, fascinating geographical note. Mount Moriah is the place where Jesus was crucified, that part of Jerusalem there. It wasn't Jerusalem. It wasn't called Jerusalem. It wasn't the city of Jerusalem when Abraham was there. This is the same place, this Mount Moriah. Pretty fascinating, Genesis 22 there. Okay. There's lots of other stuff in here you can obviously read through, but I don't want your video to be 18 hours long because you will stop listening. We move forward to the patriarchs. The patriarchs now we know Abraham's family is going to be this multitude that's going to bless the whole earth. So I want you to understand and read that when you see someone like Joseph come along and you see this person, Joseph, being put into the kind of clutches and claws of these nations so that he suffers and is put in a place of prominence in order to bless and save the nations. So here's somebody who is given such a position that when the nations are in famine, again, they go down to Egypt. Where do you go for a famine apparently in that time? You go to Egypt. There's a reason for it, by the way. Egypt was less deserty than it is now, so it was much more agrarian and green, and they had the ability to produce a lot more food. B, they were the biggest kingdom for centuries at the time. Also, there are other kingdoms. This is more for the past lesson. There are other kingdoms like where Abraham came from, but those are way far away, and you have to go up and over the desert to get to them. And so really in this part of the world that we're talking about there around Israel and Canaan, Egypt at this time is and will be the biggest kingdom around. That doesn't really matter right now. Joseph saves the world, really. He's God's person put into this special place among the nations to rise to a level of prominence in order to save not only the world, but his brothers. And so here we have already somebody blessing the nations. Reading that box there on 59 where it says going head to head, we'll talk about that, I think, a little more in person in class, but that is part of the play out of that idea we talked in the last video and the themes about representation, where one represents the whole. So when two come together, what happens there is going to be important for not only them as individuals, but for both sides. We'll talk about that. Yeah, we'll talk about that more in class. I don't want to belabor you here on the video. The Exodus comes, as we said, God shows his power over the gods of Egypt so that the plagues correspond to something the Egyptians either held to be a god itself, the Nile, they kind of saw that way, and Pharaoh's son, or something that a god was in charge over, like the frogs and the gnats and things like that. Okay, so God is showing his power over Egypt. He's also giving Egypt, he wasn't necessarily going to judge them. He gives them the opportunity. Here's what's so cool is in Exodus 12:38, it mentions that a mixed multitude, meaning a multi-ethnic large group of people, leaves with the Hebrew people. They exit and follow them all the way into the wilderness. Some of them are going to cause problems in the wilderness, but they're going to be observing God's people throughout the wilderness. We have likewise the Passover here, and in your theme video when I talked about typology, I mentioned some of why the Passover is a type, right? It points us forward to something greater, which is Jesus, in that we have a greater lamb sacrifice in Jesus, the Lamb of God. We have a greater firstborn son being killed. We have a greater exodus out of slavery, not slavery to Egyptians, but Jesus says that anyone who sins is a slave to sin, but whom the Son sets free will be free indeed. I'm putting two verses together there, but nevertheless, we have a greater version of what's happening here, and that's typology. So it can be an event, it can be an institution like sacrifice itself, or it can be a person. And so we are pointed here to something greater to come. As God's people leave Egypt and they go into the wilderness, they're formed into truly God's people under the law. It's the law that makes them different from the rest of the world. It's the law that makes them God's people. And God tells them that they are to be his kingdom of priests. In Exodus 19:6, they are going to show the rest of the world through their conduct, through their worship, through their relationship with Yahweh, God's name, that they're going to be the priests. Priests do two things. They represent God to the people, and they mediate between God and the people. And so now Israel is going to be God's mediator to the rest of the world. Already here in Exodus, we're 2 books into the Bible. We're not very far in, and already we have God using his people to show himself and welcome in anybody from anywhere else. Be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it. You should be getting a picture here of this as part of that, in that they are filling the earth with worshipers of Yahweh and subduing so that these people come in under the lordship of Yahweh. This is their purpose, and this is a super big deal. Even at Mount Sinai, you think about all these people are observing what's going on, God giving the law, the people being punished. All throughout the wilderness scene, you should picture foreigners watching what's going down and understanding Yahweh better through his interactions with his people, and through his mercy with his people and his provision. So who's also eating quail, who's also drinking the water in the wilderness? These people are. All right. Again, keep reading. God institutes festivals and the sacrificial system, the priesthood. All of these are going to point to Jesus. Even things like, if you read the story in Numbers 21 of the bronze serpent on the pole, where the people rebelled and they were bitten by these fiery serpents or venomous snakes, And Moses puts up an image of a serpent up on a pole, and all they had to do was look to it. And by looking to it, they were healed. Similarly, in the New Testament, in John 6, Jesus says that the Son of Man, as he calls himself, will be lifted up, and those who look to him will be healed, will be saved. Moses is told in the wilderness in Deuteronomy, really as they come out of the wilderness, but in Deuteronomy that the people will provoke God to jealousy, and so they will be put into exile, and God will use the nations to make them jealous so that they will return to him. Well, Romans 9 through 11, mainly 11, talks about God's plan to use the Gentiles who have faith and are part of Jesus' people now to provoke Israel to jealousy so that they will return to the Lord, which is a pretty amazing connection there. So God is continuing his purpose with his people. Even in the wilderness, he starts to talk about almost like a flood thing, not with the whole world, but with his people, that I'm gonna wipe them out. Moses, I'm gonna start again with you. I'm gonna wipe out all these descendants of Abraham. You can be the new Abraham. I'm gonna start again with you. Moses says, no, Lord, even just judge me, but don't put your judgment on them. So here, innocent Moses is saying, I'll stand in the gap for my people. You can judge me. This is a picture of who you should be cluing into something here. Why are so many of these things in red? They point us to somebody who's going to actually accomplish these things that are only hinted at or mentioned or done in part here in the Old Testament. When we get to the section on the conquest and the judges, we come into the land. The people do. They don't fully conquer it. And in doing so, again, they really engage with idols. This is exactly what they were told not to do, but this is what they do. And we get this partial rescue in the judges. There's a partial, God kind of partially helps them, but it's not a king yet. They seem to need a king. And Judges several times says there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. It's repeated at least twice, I feel like 3 times, but at least at the beginning and the end of Judges, that everyone did what is right in his own eyes. There was no king in Israel in those days, clearly setting us up that a king is coming, a king is needed. However, we get this funny insert, these 2 inserts into the both in Joshua, the book of Joshua, talking about the conquering, as well as the book of Ruth, which happens, it says, during the time of the judges. So Joshua first, chronologically, Ruth later. In Joshua, there's this woman, Rahab, who knows of the Israelites, is afraid of the Israelites, knows of their God, is afraid of their God, helps them, allies herself with them, and is later listed in Jesus' genealogy. So here's an individual from a place they were supposed to destroy, who her and her family allied themselves with God's people, and God welcomed them into the point of making her part of the genealogy of the one who's coming from Eve. Likewise, you have the story of Ruth. And the story of Ruth is a beautiful story, and it's often encouraging, it's lovely, it's this. It really is a beautiful story. It's not very long either. You could read it really quickly. In the story of Ruth, there's a lot of layers that are going on there. One of those layers is that here's a couple layers. She marries Boaz because Boaz is able in their culture to redeem her, to really what it was buy back the land that her former husband, her dead husband, she's a widow, her husband has left, and it's sort of just left in stasis, and she can't just go take possession of it, but he could buy it, and he could marry her and make the land hers through marrying her. A little bit weird, but he redeems her in that way. He allows her to have back what she lost. Likewise, Ruth is part of the Moabites, and the Moabites were listed while the Israelites are in the wilderness. The Moabites are among a handful of tribes, other people groups, that are listed as the no-no people groups. Don't ever be friends with them. Don't ever ally yourself with them. Don't ever be nice to them. They are bad. And she's part of that group. It actually says, don't ever allow a Moabite into your people into your camp. Don't be part of your society. Oh my goodness. But it seems like when you read the book of Ruth, the book of Ruth seems to approve this. This seems to be okay. Remember what we're learning about God? That God gives his law, but his mercy trumps his law. It doesn't mean that God, and we're going to see why and how this works with Jesus later on, but this doesn't mean that God is ignoring his own rules, but mercy triumphs over judgment. And so God is it's not that he's like, and then kill Ruth because she is a Moabitess. That doesn't happen. He allows her in. Not only that, but notice, if you read the story of Ruth, notice what she gains. She gains land in Israel, children, and actually a multitude of descendants. She's also listed in Jesus' genealogy, okay? One of those descendants is going to be David, and another one is going to be Jesus. She's blessed. What does that kind of sound like? That sounds like the promise to Abraham. Does she inherit the entirety of the promise to Abraham? No. But here's a Gentile, forbidden Moabitess woman who has no right to any of this, who is receiving a part of what God promised to Abraham. What kind of God are we getting to know here in the Old Testament? Moving on, we have the United Kingdom. How is the United Kingdom brought about? Well, the people had no king, we said, and they wanted a king. They wanted a king like the nations. King like the nations implies one that's tangible and here that they can see, touch, and smell, although I don't know how often they smelled kings. In that day, they didn't have deodorants. Maybe they smelled the kings fairly often. But Ching, bad Bible joke. It's also a king who's probably, I think some of the subtext is, going to subjugate them. At the time, the kings were pretty ruthless warlords who had kind of despotic power. And you go, well, nobody would ever ask for somebody to have, despotic power over them. Yeah, we would. Yeah, we would. Yeah, we would. Sin often puts us under the control of somebody else. It wants somebody else to tell us what to do. It allows somebody else to have power over us. It allows somebody else to cause us to fear them. Sin often does that kind of destruction in our lives. And it seems counterintuitive, but if you really start to get to know human nature, you realize that human nature is often to say, be over me, even if it causes me harm, that I would allow myself to be subjugated by somebody. That's actually pretty common in human nature. Small scale relationships, big, there's some horrible leader, but he's on my side. And so, yes, be my horrible leader. That happens all the time. And so that's part of what the people are doing. But they're also doing is they're rejecting God as their king. And that's what, if you read, that's what Samuel gets so upset about. And God says, no, let them have a king. So God gives them Saul, and Saul is tall. There's really nothing else going for Saul. He does okay, but he's basically tall. And during this time, so Saul moves on to David. David is God's anointed king, but he's anointed before he's crowned. So this is an already not yet. David is already king in God's sight, but not yet king fully and completely. So it takes David decades to become the king. When David becomes the king, God actually makes a covenant promise to David that he will have a king who will have his throne forever. So David is promised a king in his line that will have the throne forever. And we would say, who holds the throne forever? It's Jesus, the son of David, Jesus, the descendant of David. During this time, the temple is built, and the temple is going to be the place where God communes with his people. What's interesting when Solomon dedicates the temple is he says, when your people come and pray, this is in 1 Kings 8, when the people come and pray here, Lord, hear their prayer and answer them. And then he says, when any of the people from any of the nations come, hear their prayer and answer them. So even in the very purpose statement of the temple is that it's a gathering place where all nations will come. This is going to be important because when we define the temple in different ways, or rather see different iterations of the temple throughout the Bible, different versions of the temple, okay, the purpose is going to remain the same. A place where people interact with God, a place where heaven and earth meet together, a place where proper worship of God is done, a place where anybody can come and experience God and pray to God. That's what happens at the temple. Okay, so Solomon has his reign, and his reign is pretty good. His reign is really peaceful. His reign is really prosperous, which is great.
Ultimately, though, it's not peaceful and prosperous enough. Ultimately, we're going to need another king with a more peaceful and more prosperous reign. Somebody else needs to do better than this. But one thing that's really interesting about Solomon's peace and prosperity, two things really. How does he get so prosperous and what does he do with it? Part of how he builds up his kingdom is through, really the technical term would be corvée labor. It's sort of like forced civil service, but it's not quite slavery. It's definitely servitude. It's definitely like an indentured servitude. So in the Bible, in the law, the king was not supposed to force the servitude of any of the Israelites. But now we actually see Solomon doing that. So that's a problem. What does he do with his wealth? He's buying a bunch of horses and chariots from Egypt. The law actually said that the king was not to amass horses and chariots and not to buy them from Egypt. So we see that Solomon now is beginning to look like one of these Gentile kings. Well, that's what the people asked for, somebody who would rule over them. And here they got it. What's also interesting about Solomon and about the temple is how the temple is built. It's built in the partnership with Hiram, king of Tyre. And so Hiram is a foreign king, but he's participating very completely in the building of the temple. So even in something as sacred as the place where God and his people meet together is built by Jews and Gentiles in cooperation with one another. Okay. You have in the story the Queen of Sheba coming in 1 Kings 10. She comes, she marvels at Solomon's wisdom. So the nations now are being gathered to see, again, kind of like at Mount Sinai out in the wilderness, to see God through the lens of his people, to see what these people are who follow this Yahweh, what this Yahweh is and does in them and through them, who he is through the lens of his people. But then 1 Kings 11, so we have a woman from the nations glorifying God because of his people. In 1 Kings 10, 1 Kings 11, we talk about Solomon's foreign wives and how they drew him away from glorifying God. So we get this juxtaposition. 1 Kings 10, woman from the nations glorifying God because of Solomon. 1 Kings 11, Solomon not glorifying God because of women from the nations. Okay, so you should see a correlation there. And then this begins us on this spiral that's going to go down and down and down as we go. You have an appendix at the end of this, and so you can note some ways in the appendix that David is a type, a picture, a pointing to of Jesus. I outline a bunch for you in the appendix, a whole table of ways that they're similar, but David is the closest type, the closest person to show us a foreshadowing, we learned that term in the last video, of Jesus to come. Okay. We have our divided kingdom period where the prophets are speaking, and they're speaking to the people and to the nations about judgment coming. God is very patient, but eventually God is going to send the people into exile. But during this time, Isaiah prophesies, towards the end of this time, Isaiah prophesies more than any other prophet about the Messiah, about this person who's going to come, who's going to suffer, or in the 50s of Isaiah, especially 52 and 53, theologians call them the servant songs, that there's a suffering servant who will come, who will, go read Isaiah 53, a suffering servant whose suffering will heal, take away our iniquity, and count us righteous. Oh my goodness, right? And so I want you to see, even as things digress, as things fall apart, God is sending his prophets, his people, to say, hope is coming, hope is coming. So is God just going to zap them because they're disobedient? No, rather he's going to send them into exile. This had been something that God had told them was going to happen. Way back in the wilderness, God told Moses that this was going to happen. Before they enter the promised land, the end of Deuteronomy has a list of blessings and cursings. Blessings if they follow the law, cursings if they don't. And ultimately, the curses were to take them away from this promised land, and that's what's happening in exile. They're being separated from the promised land. They're being separated from the temple. The temple is destroyed. This is the place where they were to commune with God. All of that is gone, and the exile is this really dark kind of second act in the Bible story. And so we get several prophets during this time, kind of in the immediate lead up to, and then the immediately after, but Hosea, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Daniel, these are all during this time. The people are put into exile, and the foreign kings, kind of like the Queen of Sheba, the foreign kings begin to see who God is and his glory through his people. This is very much a theme in the book of Daniel, that the kings would see and glorify God through seeing his people. So they're displaying for all the nations who God truly is. God is going to use Esther for his purpose to preserve his people. She's going to put herself at risk, put herself on the line, at the risk of being crushed by an earthly king, in the hopes that all her people will be saved. That kind of sound like somebody who was actually crushed by an earthly ruler so that his people could be saved, right? And so the Jews are preserved through persecution by Esther under the Persian king. And at the end of Esther, by the way, if you go read Esther, at the end, it says that the Jews were actually given a time to sort of retaliate, and in these very specific areas, they were allowed to go and fight back against the people who had fought against them. And it actually says then many joined them. There's a weird kind of ending to Esther that we often ignore, but many of the Gentiles in the Persian Empire became Israelites, became Jews, joined themselves with the Jews at the end of that story. And we sometimes miss that because maybe we don't know what to do with it and I'll talk about individualism in class, but we're so focused in on Esther and what she did and how we can be like an Esther that we kind of miss the bigger picture of what God is doing, which is bringing all peoples into his people, yes, through the work of one person. The people return from exile, and there's this really difficult chapter for a lot of people in the book of Hosea where, Ezra, where when they get back, a bunch of people have married foreign wives again and are forced to divorce them. Now, throughout the Old Testament, people married foreign wives, and it didn't always seem to be a problem, but it's a problem here, and I believe it's a problem here because they're seeing that these are not, in the Bible, it's never a problem if a foreigner becomes an Israelite and follows Yahweh. That's okay. So the implication here, I believe, is that these are foreign wives who are not following Yahweh, who are still following their foreign gods. So what sent us originally into this spiral? Solomon and his foreign gods. Solomon and his wives and their foreign gods who led him away to worship their gods with them. So when they come back, Ezra is seeing, oh my gosh, we're doing the exact same thing again. This needs to be nipped in the bud. And I think when we see it that way, it makes some more sense. And so they come back, they rebuild the temple, and they talk about how disappointing the temple is, that everybody, kind of was done, and they're like, that's really not how it used to be, That's really not what, my father told me about. That's really not what the old people remember. That's really not how it was when we left. It's just a kind of a shell of its former glory. Yes, the people have returned. They're back in the land. They have a revival. They're worshiping the God of the true God of the Bible again, but it's just not the same. It's just not the same. It's disappointing. The Old Testament kind of leaves us on this disappointing note, and the book of Malachi leaves us with this rebuke again. Hey, kind of sounds like before they went into exile, actually, but it's written after exile. You say God doesn't love you. You say you rob God of what he's owed. You know what? Elijah's going to come. There's going to be an Elijah coming. Weird. That's how the Old Testament ends. But what's going on here is that I want to read this box to you at the bottom of this page here, page 68. It says, in the closing events of the Old Testament, the people have returned from exile, the temple is rebuilt, Jerusalem restored, and the people mostly revived. However, none of these things rises to the level of God's purpose for his people. They are back in the land, but have not fully returned. She is still spread around the world. Woo! What am I right? Oh, yeah. She, the people of Israel. Sorry, I wrote this a while back. She, Israel, is still spread around the world, subjugated to foreign powers. Remember, much of the people of God are still in exile and unfaithful to her God. Israel awaits her king, but the world doesn't know that it awaits its savior. And so we are left off here. This is the end of the Old Testament. We are left off wanting and waiting. And you're, at the end of an episode, great episode of TV where you're like, well, what's going to happen next? Or how's this person going to get out of this? Or what's going to happen? And we're left with a kind of a bitter taste. We're kind of left with a bitter taste at the end of the Old Testament. And but for a person to come to make this right, we would always have that bitter taste. And I think our Jewish neighbors are going to have that bitter taste until they realize somebody's going to come to make this right. All right. That ends that, and we will see you in class. Thanks.